Hello, today we're going to be drawing dynamic poses. So for this one I'm going to be drawing Yor from Spy Family. We all know and love her. And first I usually start with a kind of a skeleton. This one I'm going to be starting at the foot, and I use the circles to indicate that these are usually where a joint or some sort of connection is going to be made. So I drew, here's the shoulder blade. And moving into the head here, if you can see, I have that line going back. That's going to be her arm. And I had to readjust the canvas. I always mess up on digital canvases. Usually, since I'm not like professionally trained and didn't really go to school for art, I usually don't have a right or wrong way to do this. This is more of a self-taught sort of thing. So when I usually do a foreshortened type of pose, I try to imagine it like we're starting at the base and then it flows upwards. You know that drawing bodies can be quite tricky, and I feel that it's helpful, for me at least, drawing some sort of skeleton that helps kind of indicate where the body's flow and motion is coming from. When we're trying to get this kind of a pose, we need to make sure that the leg and the arm in the background over here are a lot smaller than this foot that's going to be in the foreground, so that we can get this foreshortened look that we're trying to get. I know for now it looks like a bunch of scribbles, but I promise this is part of the process. This is going to be more of the base for when we want to lay down the line work. I never really feel totally qualified giving advice on how to correctly do art one way or the other, especially since I never went to school for it or anything like that. But some tips and tricks that I found that are very helpful, at least for getting poses and solid line work down, is having a good skeleton to work with. So we've finished that up and now we're going to be working on the line. I typically start with a pretty thin liner, and I like to usually start on the part of the piece that's going to be in the foreground. Just kind of following the sketch that we had underneath is really helpful. You can add kinds of muscles. I think that looking at references for muscle work and even body poses for models and things like that can really help get some of those tiny little details that actually make the work look way more fluid and dynamic than it would if you didn't have some of these lines, for example, under the kneecap here, or even using that line up there to guide where the muscle would be. I also usually like to use the portion above the knee right here that we're working on to sell that foreshortened look of the leg. I imagine that the leg is moving upward. Here I'm going to be adding a circle or a half circle to help guide me for when we're going to be adding clothing, and it kind of just helps me infer how the leg is moving, where it's going. Considering the ankle here is going to be our base, this should be more of a flattened zone, whereas the half circles we drew up on the calf and thigh would be driven into a direction from the base to the top. I feel that this section is always a little bit tricky, especially for this type of pose. We're going to revisit it a little bit later, but for now I'm just adding some line in there to kind of help guide and infer where the rest of the body would fall. I'm going to be outlining the shoulder blades here, and I like to think of arms as three distinct pieces. I know this isn't probably accurate if you're formally educated, but I like to think of them as three pieces that connect. Again, I do think that looking at muscle references can be really, really helpful with defining and making arms look more realistic. Adding definition into the arms and the legs can really change a piece and make it look so much more dynamic. Here I'm going to be adding the chest and the belly. I imagine that this is where the belly button would go, where the dip in that belly is, and I just kind of use that to infer where the back and the shoulder would be placed. Now again, when we're working on this leg that's supposed to be over in the background, we're going to make it significantly smaller than the one in the foreground, which I know can feel a little bit unnatural when you're drawing it, but it really is what lends that effect. I also feel that adding, I didn't do it here, but adding guidelines in the background can help infer how and where the body is going to be flowing. We're going to be adding the other arm in here, and I have to redo it a few times because hands and arms are always a little bit difficult for me. I like to think of arms as more rounded. I know that it can be depicted as usually like sharp points, especially at the elbow, but I find drawing arms to be more drawing circles and ovals. I'm also going to be drawing a chin, just to guide where the face is going to go. I was trying to go for a looking up kind of angle. I'm not sure if that came across, but we'll see. I'll work on it a little bit more later on. Some tips and tricks that I think are really helpful. I didn't do it in this piece. Usually I start with the chest cavity, and I usually use this to kind of help guide where the body is going to go. I know a lot of people say start at the head, but I feel like starting at the face or head can kind of lock you into a pose that you may not want. So if you're doing like a front-facing face, then it might be challenging to contort the body a little bit. So generally when I'm starting with bodies, I usually like to start with the chest cavity, because from there we can kind of rotate the hips or move the legs or arms into a more dynamic pose, whereas I feel like starting with the head can really kind of lock you into a set pose and kind of limit what you're able to do with the rest of the body. Usually starting with the chest or even the pelvic structure can really help lend more creativity to the pose that you want to draw. I know I'm struggling a little bit here, but whenever I'm drawing a profile, usually I like to use that line as a guide. I usually want the forehead to meet where the chin will meet from the profile. You don't want the chin to be too far in or be too far out, and vice versa. So I really like to try to keep the nose and lips within that kind of range so that the forehead still meets where the chin meets. On to the eyes here, I had to draw a guide because I'm trying to again go for a looking up direction for the face, so I needed to draw a guide here to help infer where the eyes were going to go. Whenever I draw this angle, I try to show a little bit of the chin and jawline, and then I kind of bring the eye at an upward slope so that it kind of gives off the effect that we're trying to look up and that the face is tilting upward. I'm by no means a Procreate expert, but this little tool is super helpful for moving things and changing the size on things. So I use this little lasso tool to kind of make that face a little bit smaller, and I'm also going to bring the head up a little more just because I felt that it didn't really look like it was in the right place and that it was a little oversized compared to the body. Getting back into her left arm, I'm going to start with the shoulder blade, and again, I think of it as 3 pieces, and usually it's 3 ovals, sometimes a little bit of a circle on the shoulder blade leading into 2 ovals. That's usually how I imagine the arm to look, and then we can add in things like the armpit and the elbow and those sorts of things. I'm going to be moving on to the hand here, but I tried to capture this angle. I'm not really sure if it came across, but I was trying to go for a hand that was kind of facing us and lifting off of the ground a little bit, trying to put pressure on the nails and the fingertips to try to make it look like she's pushing off of the ground. Usually when I draw hands, I try to imagine 2 ovals to kind of represent the palm, and usually use the thumb to kind of guide where the rest of the fingers will go. I tried to see if putting this pinky back would work, but it just kind of looked disjointed. I didn't really want to hide it behind the rest of the fingers, but I felt that was the only kind of place it could go based on the angle. For the right arm, I'm trying to kind of get this angle where it kind of looks like it's almost overextending so that we can place her dagger in the hand. This hand took a little bit for me to get right. I was using the sketch on the bottom layer to kind of infer where the palm would go, and based on that I used the thumb as a guideline to infer where the rest of the fingers would go. This one was a little bit tricky, so this one I had to kind of envision the knuckles and where the knuckles would line. I had to draw some on the bottom layer so that I could use them as a guide. Another tip for when I'm drawing hands is I like to think of them similarly to the arm, as the main fingers as like 3 distinct joints, and then the thumb is more of 2. Now that we've kind of gotten the sketch for the body and all that down, I usually move into hair and accessories once I've already kind of gotten that whole sketch laid out. So we'll be moving on to the hair. Yor has really cute little bangs that fall in front of her eyes, and then 2 little strips of hair that come in front of her ears. So here I'm trying to kind of guide to see where they would fall, since again she is at an angle. In order to get this effect, I need to make sure that the hair is kind of falling to the ground as if it's being pulled by gravity. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I had to go to the under sketch to kind of help me understand how the hair and clothing would eventually fall once I started drawing that on. Switching back to the liner, now we're going to be kind of not outlining but following where that guide has been placed with drawing the hair. It took me a couple of attempts. I feel like hair can be tricky, but if you get the hair right, I feel like you can really add depth to the drawing. I always feel like anime hair especially is so tricky to make look good and realistic, just because, especially older animes where the hair is kind of wacky and crazy. Some little tiny things that I like to do that I think helps the hair look a little bit better is adding little tiny gaps in the hair, like in the strip right up in the front here, and I'll be adding another one onto the other side. There's a little tiny gap in the hair and I just think these little tiny touches make the hair look more realistic than if it's just one chunk of hair. Another thing to keep in mind whenever you're doing an updo is I always overline where the head outline is and try to make like a little bump just to kind of mimic how hair would normally look if it was in an updo. She has a bun that's more on the back of her head, so I tried to make a little bump at the base of her hair. Moving on to her clothes, so she wears a little dress that's kind of short in the front but has a trail. For this one, I wanted to kind of make her trail like kind of ripped and tattered, and I opted to kind of take off her, she usually has long boots on, I opted to take those off because I'd already drawn the foot and I couldn't really resize it on the canvas, so I decided to just kind of take that off and make it look like she's kind of tattered as if she's been in a battle. I'll be erasing that line there that I put for her boot. Going in here a little bit, trying to revise this. It's always tricky drawing gravitational pulls. So for here, I'm trying to parse that through, but it takes me a little while to get it correct, especially with her dress. Her dress is a little bit funky and it has a bunch of straps in the front. So I was trying to kind of figure out how we would do that and what it would look like if it was like fastened securely in the dress, or if, you know, we were going to be free falling. Little sleeves here. So I feel like making clothing look a little more realistic or dimensional is kind of when you're drawing the line work. So on the arm here, which I just did, I don't make the lines meet exactly. Whenever there's any sort of sleeve, I'll be doing it right here. I usually make it so that it'll overline the arm a little bit, just so it doesn't look like it's part of her body. Here I was just trying to kind of figure out how we got the dress to wrap around her. It's a little bit of a weird dress and kind of hard to get with the neckline, especially with those sleeves and the little choker piece that's part of the dress. But I think we kind of settled on it. Here I'm just adding some small creases and a little bit of outlining here so that we can see a little bit what's going on with the dress and how the body's moving in it, and connecting any pieces that are not really jointed together and kind of making this look like it's like one cohesive piece of fabric rather than having that raw outline still there. Here I was trying to add the trail. I was gonna go for the original like long one in the start of it, but I just couldn't get it right. I couldn't really figure out how it would fall on the ground and work with the leg. And I kind of just didn't like it. It just kind of looked like she was wearing something that was tucked into her pants. So I kind of scrapped it. For here, I mean, I was trying to go for a draped look, which is what I was trying to do with the lines here. I mean, it doesn't really matter because I get rid of it anyways, but I did kind of keep some of that outline there to kind of look like it's draping over her leg and falling towards the foreground.